You know how your favorite coffee shop almost always seems to have the perfect number of pastries? Or how a car maker knows roughly how many red SUVs to build next year? Well, behind almost every single product you buy, there's this hidden science of predicting the future. And today, we're going to pull back the curtain on it. We're diving deep into demand forecasting.
But first, let's start with something we've all felt. You walk into a store, you've got one thing on your mind, that specific brand of oat milk, that shirt in your size, and you get to the shelf, and it's empty. It's so frustrating, right? Well, that little moment of disappointment, that is the real-world consequence of a forecast gone wrong.
Because every single business, from the corner store to a giant multinational, is constantly facing this challenge. They have to place a bet on what you and millions of other people are going to want to buy tomorrow, next week, or even 5 years from now. And the secret weapon they use to try and win that bet, to bring some kind of order to all that chaos, is called demand forecasting. It's the tool that turns a wild guess into an educated, data-driven prediction. And today we're going to figure out exactly how it works.
So, here's our roadmap. First, we'll talk about why this is so important. Then, we'll nail down what demand forecasting actually is. After that, we'll get into the 3 secret rules that everyone in the business lives by. And finally, we'll figure out how you can tell a good forecast from a bad one.
All right, so first things first, why even bother? Why do companies pour millions of dollars and countless hours into trying to predict what's going to happen? Well, because the stakes are incredibly high.
It really all boils down to these 4 things. Get it right, and you save a ton of money by not making stuff nobody wants. You keep customers like you and me happy because the things we want are actually on the shelf. It helps the entire company run like a well-oiled machine, and it protects them from the huge financial risks of a totally unpredictable world.
Okay, let's move on and get a really clear definition of what we're actually talking about here, because it's a lot more than just gazing into a crystal ball.
At its heart, demand forecasting is pretty simple. It's the process of estimating what customers are going to want in the future. But here's the key part. That estimate isn't just some interesting number they look at. It is the direct input for almost every major decision a business makes. How much to order, how many people to hire, even how to plan their finances.
And what's really fascinating is that it's not a one-size-fits-all thing. Forecasting happens on different levels. At the very top, you've got the strategic level, looking years into the future to answer huge questions like, should we build a new factory? Then you zoom in to the tactical level, thinking months ahead for things like budgeting and sales planning. And then you get right down to the nitty-gritty, the operational level. That's about today, tomorrow, and this week, planning delivery routes and figuring out what to make next.
All right, now we're getting to the heart of it. If you work in supply chain or planning, there are 3 fundamental truths you live and die by. Think of them as the laws of forecasting gravity. Understanding these is the key to, well, everything.
Here they are. Number 1, and this is going to sound a little weird. Forecasts are always wrong. Seriously. The goal isn't to be perfect, it's just to be less wrong over time. Second, aggregated forecasts are always more accurate. And third, the further out you try to see, the fuzzier the picture gets, so shorter forecasts are more accurate. Let's break those down.
Let's really focus on that second truth, because this is where the magic happens. Look at this chart. That jagged red line? That's what unpredictable, volatile demand looks like. It's all over the place. The smooth blue line is what we want. Stable, predictable demand. The entire game of forecasting is finding clever ways to turn that chaotic red line into that calm blue one. And we actually measure this chaos with a number called the coefficient of variation, or CV. The goal is to get that number as low as possible.
So the big question is, how do we actually do that? How do you take something messy and smooth it out to make the future easier to see? Well, the answer is a powerful little concept called aggregation.
Let's make this super real. Think about coffee cup lids at a sandwich shop. If you track how many lids they use every single day, the graph is a mess. It's spiky, it's chaotic, it's really hard to predict. It's got a pretty high CV of 0.31, which tells us it's volatile. But watch what happens when we stop looking at it day by day and instead we just group or aggregate that same exact data into weekly buckets. Whoa! The line gets way smoother, right? A lot of that random daily noise just cancels itself out. It becomes so much easier to see the pattern, and look at that CV. It dropped all the way to 0.12.
Now let's take it one step further and look at it by the month. It's almost a straight line. It's incredibly stable. The underlying demand is still the same, but we've basically stripped away all the distracting noise and uncertainty. Our CV is now a tiny 0.06. We've made the future predictable just by changing our perspective.
And this isn't just about time. You can also aggregate by location. So instead of trying to predict the lid demand for 3 separate stores, which is tough, a company can pool all that demand at a central warehouse. The random busy day at one store gets canceled out by a random slow day at another. This makes the total demand much smoother and the forecast for that central warehouse way more accurate. It's brilliant.
And that brings us to our third truth: shorter forecasts are more accurate. On the left, a shop tries to guess weeks ahead exactly how many turkey sandwiches versus ham sandwiches people will want. That's really hard. But on the right, they use a much smarter strategy called postponement. They just forecast the total need for a common ingredient, like meat. Then they wait until the very last second, when you actually order, to assemble the final sandwich. By delaying that decision, their forecast for a specific sandwich becomes perfectly accurate because it happens in real time.
Okay, so companies are using all these principles to create forecasts. But how do they know if they're any good? How do you actually keep score in this game?
So let me ask you a question. Take a look at this. The red dots are what really happened, actual sales. Now say you have 2 different forecasts. One gives you the green triangles, which are always a bit too high. The other gives you the blue squares, always a bit too low. Which forecast is better?
Well, the answer is, you can't really tell just by looking. You have to measure 2 different things. Think of it like a target. First, there's accuracy. How close, on average, are your shots to the bullseye? And second, there's bias. Do you have a habit of always missing in the same direction? Always high and to the right, or always low and to the left? A great forecast is both accurate and unbiased.
And we don't just eyeball it, we use math to give us a score. This is a real example from a bagel shop. You don't need to get lost in the numbers, but just look at the table. It's pretty simple. It compares the forecast to what was actually sold to find the error each day. Then, using a metric like mean absolute deviation, or MAD, we can figure out the average error over time. This gives us one solid number that tells us exactly how good or bad our forecast is.
And this brings us to what might be the most crucial point of all. The goal is not 100% accuracy. That's a fool's errand. Chasing perfection gets incredibly expensive really fast. As this chart shows, there's a cost to getting your forecast better, and there's a cost when you make errors. The sweet spot, that good region, is where the total cost is at its lowest. It's about being just accurate enough to make smart business decisions and no more.
So there you have it, the secret rules that help businesses peek around the corner and prepare for the future. The next time you see a perfectly stocked shelf or an empty one, you'll know a little bit more about the complex dance of prediction that led to that very moment. Now that you're in on the secrets, what forecasting puzzles will you start to see in the world all around you?